now. Okay, so some reminders about essay 3. That essay is due tonight. Okay, so that is, that shouldn't be a surprise to any of you. If it is, I apologize. But your essay 3 is due tonight. Now, this essay should be 4 or more pages in length, not including your works cited page, right? So you have to hit that 4-page mark and then have the works cited page after that. All right, and that's 4 full pages. You have to utilize at least 4 secondary sources in the essay, right? Which means you can't just throw it on the works cited page and not reference it. You have to actually reference it in the essay. Okay, so let's see here. The essay 3 guide didn't have the page length. It didn't. Give me 1 second to pop over there and see. If it didn't have the page length, then of course I will address that. Give me 1 moment, because that was an issue I had last term, and I remember going in and changing it. I may have uploaded the wrong document. Okay. So I just pulled it up, and it does indicate the page length. Let me kind of pop over to our assignment requirements for this one. Share files is not what I want. I want to share my application. So the essay 3 requirements, I pulled this right out of term materials. You can see right at the beginning, a 4 to 5 page analysis of your chosen short story, poem, or play. Okay, so that 4 to 5 page requirement is present in that document. So the 4 to 5 pages is what will stand. So there's another doc. Where is that other doc, Craig? All right, Craig's finding that for me. So what we'll do is we'll continue to talk while Craig finds that, and then once you find that, then just let me know, and then I can kind of real quick come up with an idea as to how we can mitigate this. All right, so let me pop our PowerPoint back on. Okay, so the biggest thing that I've noticed in each of the essays is that you guys aren't, or not you guys as a whole, but many individuals in the class aren't using the required number of secondary sources in the essay, okay? So make sure that you reference either in paraphrase or in quotation at each of those 4 secondary sources that are required for the essay, okay? That's important. For every one that you don't use, you lose 5 points, right? So that ends up knocking down your grade pretty heavily if there's a couple. Also, make sure that the primary source that you're using is listed on the works cited page. All right, because if you don't have the primary source on there, even if you're citing things in text, you're not citing to anything, because your reader can't look at your works cited page and see which edition they should be using. So again, for the most part, you guys are good with this, but there's a good chunk of individuals who are forgetting to do this. So make sure that your primary source is on your works cited page. That'll knock you down a full letter grade if you don't have that. All right, so please, please, please make sure that you copy and paste that. Now, you can find the primary sources for all of the editions that we use in class in the course readings tab. All right, so Craig just messaged back, essay 3 assignment requirements under weekly modules ending on 7/3. All right, let me pop back there real quick. Okay. All right, so that was an unupdated version. For that, I apologize, but on the plus side, what that means is we are going to revert to the previous one. Okay, so we're going to do 3 to 4, not 304, that's too many. Okay, so 3 to 4 pages before the works cited page. Thank you for pointing that out, Craig. I thought I had weeded through before term and got rid of all those old docs, but I guess that one happened to slip by me. So I'm so sorry about that. But on the plus side, that now means that you guys don't have to write as much. So it's 3 to 4 pages. If you've already written 4 or more, that's okay. You can definitely submit it like that as well. So that's totally fine. So yeah, 3 to 4. Just make sure you're using those 4 secondary scholarly sources and that you put your primary source on the works cited page. Those are the biggest things that people sort of mess up. One other thing I want to point out is that you want to make sure that your MLA formatting is correct in both in-text citations and in the works cited page, and then the overall paper formatting as well. I use the mechanics and cohesion section. It's kind of a bogus section. It's like, did you use commas right? And then that kind of lumps in MLA formatting. I ignore the punctuation part because if I can understand it, I'm happy with that. But as far as the MLA goes, that's kind of where I shoot that. All right. So if you've got all of your MLA formatting done perfectly, then you've already got 14 points right off the bat, in the bank. You want to make sure that you are, following MLA formatting so you don't lose unnecessary points. Now, there are some things that I do notice, which are basically things like forgetting to put the header font as 12-point Times New Roman, right? Little things like that. Remembering to not add extra spacing around the title, updating the deadline date, right? Not adding extra spaces between paragraphs, indenting paragraphs. All of these reminders are listed for you if you were to go into term materials and go into term materials, then tips and tricks for our course. I'll actually kind of shoot us over there right now so that way we can see it together because I want to make sure we know exactly where it is. I know I've been telling you guys to go there all term, but I want to make sure there is no confusion. So if you go to term materials, right, and then you have this tips and tricks for our course folder, then scroll down to writing tips. Then you'll see formatting your document in MLA, formatting a works cited page, and how to format MLA citations. Okay, so make sure you're utilizing these documents because you can end up bumping back a full letter grade if you don't follow MLA formatting, which stinks, right? I don't want that to happen. I like those to be easy points up for grabs. So make sure that you do that. All right, double check, make sure that everything follows. If you're having issues with things like creating a hanging indent, most of you are good with that now. We had some issues at the beginning of term, but make sure you refer to that formatting a works cited page, right? Because that'll show you not only that you have to do it, but it'll tell you how. It'll also tell you how to alphabetize your sources without having to cut and paste and move it around. All right, there's buttons in Word that'll do this for you. So make sure you utilize those documents in there. All right, so let's pop back to our PowerPoint. Which page? We're about to come into this one. Another question here in the chat. If we're using secondary sources and we're getting lines from the play, how do we cite? Okay, how do you cite lines from the play? Okay, so if you were to do that, you can actually see examples of this in the assignment requirements document. I made sure to post them in there. Even the older document does outline how to do it, but like we talked about last week, if you're using Measure for Measure as your primary source and you go to cite, what you want to do is, you just do Shakespeare, right? Because you need the author's name unless it's in the sentence. So Shakespeare, say it's happening Act 2, Scene 3, right? So it would be 2.3 point, and then you do line numbers. So 112 to 114, just like that. Okay, so you just need to indicate act, scene, and line. All right, because each of the line numbers reset at each individual scene. Okay, so we need to not only know which act you're in, we need to know which scene you're in and which lines you're in as well. Okay, so that's how you'll want to format that. Let me make a quick note that this is for Measure for Measure. Doesn't let me do italics, just know that the title, since it's a play, should be in italics. Okay, so As far as formatting a title goes, this is something that people have been struggling with all term, so I just want to put out a reminder. It's kind of a pet peeve of mine. It's definitely the most commented thing that I have to say. Okay, short story and poem titles go in quotation marks. All right, straight up, there is no deviation from that. Short story and poem titles should go in quotation marks. Play titles, if you're working with measure for measure, should be in italics. Okay, there is no kind of jumping back and forth there. Short story or poem titles never go in italics. Play titles never go in quotation marks. Okay, short story and poems, quotation marks. Play titles, italics. Okay, so make sure that you do that. It just sort of drives me up a wall, especially when I comment on it on the draft and it's still happening on the final draft, and I'm just like, so just sort of keep in mind that that's the convention for it. Now, that being said, too, article titles should be in quotation marks, too, if you discuss them in the body of your essay. I cannot type today. So if you end up saying, oh, okay, well, I want to talk about, Jane Smith's article, blah, 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 whatever it's called. Well, that blah, 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 right, that title should be in quotation marks. The easy way to check this is to look at your works cited page. If the title on the works cited page is in quotation marks, it should be in quotation marks in the essay. If the title on the works cited page is in italics, it should be in italics on the essay. Okay. So another little thing that happens super, super often is when you're ending a sentence or including a comma after a short story or play title, right? The play doesn't necessarily factor into here since we're not, since that's in italics, right? So I'm just going to get rid of that guy. You always want to put the comma inside the quotation marks, okay? And that holds true as well if you're using, a quotation sort of in the middle of the sentence and you need a comma right after, right? That goes in the quotation marks. So you want to make sure that you kind of follow these MLA conventions. And if you were to Google them, you'd be able to see that this is how you do it as well. So it's not just me, kind of coming down hard on you, but you'll, lose a point for having the comma in the wrong spot, just like little things, but those points can add up, right? So you want to make sure that you do that. Another thing is that you want to make sure that you never begin a sentence with a quotation. Okay, that's something that, kind of should have been hammered home in 1101, but I'm still kind of seeing it. So just wanted to put that out there, right? Always introduce a quotation first. It could be something like providing context for the information that the source is talking about. It could even be something like, as according to, or as stated by this particular author, and then this thing, right? I like to think of it like your reader is just sort of like dancing along on the top of the words, like the old school sing-alongs. I don't know if maybe I'm too old and you guys are too young, but the sing-alongs that had the words on the bottom of the screen, and you could sing along with them, like Disney put out a bunch or whatever, but it kind of just like bounced along. Now, if you picture your reader as being the thing that bounces along and they're not expecting a quotation, they're just going to kind of trip over it, right? You need to give the reader some sort of heads up, like, hey, this quotation is coming, or this information is going to be discussed in detail by a quote, right? And the way that you do that is by introducing it. All right, so you want to make sure that you do that. Now, another thing that I'm noticing is there's still some issues with in-text citation formatting. All right, so I wanted to just sort of put that out there really quickly. Remember, if you're using Shakespeare, right, that's a new one. So use this guy up at the top here, right, the act, scene, line formatting. If you're using short stories that have pagination, right, so for example, the yellow wallpaper, right, that would be cited Gilman 14, right? If you're using something, if you're working with A Rose for Emily, with our edition of A Rose for Emily, there are no page numbers on that. So you need to have an in-text citation that cites by paragraph. There are paragraph numbers on our edition, so you can use those. You don't have to count them all out. I already did that for you. If that's the case, then it would be Faulkner, para, whatever paragraph it is, 22. Okay? So you want to make sure you have them formatted correctly. This same style, right, holds true for your sources as well. Okay, if your sources have page numbers that are printed on the document, then use those page numbers, right? And cite it like we would cite the yellow wallpaper, right? Last name, page number. If they don't have page numbers, you're going to be counting out paragraphs, and you just cite last name, para, whatever that paragraph number is. Okay, keep in mind too that we need that period after para. Okay, that's part of MLA, so we need to do it. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Okay, another big thing that I'm struggling with, not with just you guys in this class, but in my American Lit class as well, is quoting and paraphrasing and remembering when you need to cite things. Okay, anytime you're referencing a specific point in a text, you need to cite it. Okay, that's the rule of thumb right there. Okay, so if you're quoting from a source, right, if you're actually quoting, you're taking the language word for word from a source and using it in your essay, you have to include quotation marks to tell your reader, these are not my words, and you have to include an in-text citation. Okay, that is very, very important. Okay, now that doesn't hold true only to scholarly sources either, right? So say you're stuck, right, and you go to I don't know, a website like a blog or a literary analysis webpage, and you see analysis that you love, and you go, all right, let me just copy and paste that in. That's plagiarism, right? So you still, anything that you are quoting from a source, you want to make sure you include an in-text citation and you put it in quotation marks so you don't run that risk of plagiarism. Okay. Now, if you're paraphrasing something, okay, which is taking an idea from a source, but then rephrasing it in your own words, you still have to cite that. Okay, if it's a specific reference to a point that a source is making, you need to cite that idea. Okay, you don't need quotation marks, right? Because the language is not the same; it's yours. Okay, but you have to cite it. Okay. So if you feel like you're struggling with this at all, that was just like the briefest of rundowns. If you feel like you're struggling with this at all, definitely watch the video I posted a couple weeks ago about quoting, paraphrasing, and using MLA, because that kind of ties it all together and goes a little bit more in depth. I just wanted to go through these steps because these were stumbling blocks that I've seen throughout term, and I want to make sure that since this essay is worth so much, that we didn't fall into that trap. Okay. All right. So does anyone have questions about the essays before we start talking about measure for measure? Probably should have waited until after I took a sip of my drink to turn off that PowerPoint. What's your question, Craig? Okay, so Craig says that he read something about poem citing that says you have to reference the title in the citation. That's not true. Okay, you don't need to reference the title as long as you reference the author name and the line number. Which reminds me, that's something that I didn't put on that PowerPoint. So let me share the whiteboard with you real fast. I want to show you what a poem citation should look like. And where's the whiteboard? Okay, I just can't read. Sorry. Okay, so a poem citation, say you're working with Do Not Go Gentle Into That Good Night, right? That poem by Dylan Thomas. So you would open parentheses, Thomas, line 22, right? Or if it was multiple lines, you would say, whoops, Thomas, lines, I don't even think there's a line 22 in Do Not Go Gentle Into That Good Night, but let's just roll with it. So we'll do 3 to 4 for this one. Right, so if there's multiple lines, you use the word lines. If you use the word line, then there's only one. Now, Craig, you might have read something about some sources utilize multiple poems by the same author to talk about that. In that case, if you were doing, I can't think of, okay, so Poe wrote a bunch of poems, right? So we read The Raven, but he also wrote the poem Annabel Lee. I think there's more to that title, but that's okay. So if he's kind of interchanging between citing both, the way that would work would then be to have Poe, the poem title, and then what lines you're working with. So that might have been what you were looking at. But none of us are working with multiple poems, so we're all good. So thank you for bringing that up. That's a good point. All right, other questions? Okay, so let's get started talking about measure for measure. Let's go back to our PowerPoint here. And where is it? All right, so the last time we spoke, we kind of talked about the build up to measure for measure, but we didn't get to talk about the play at all. So by now, you should have read through the end of Act 3. This is when it starts getting good, as I'm sure you're seeing. But let's just do a brief rundown of what happened in Act 1. Okay, since we didn't get a chance to talk about that, about that, let's just sort of briefly summarize, right? In Act 1, Scene 1, the Duke decides that he's going to leave Vienna and leave Angelo in charge, right? That's what starts this whole thing off. Aeschylus, who was the Duke's advisor, is now Angelo's advisor. Because Angelo is the Duke now. He is the acting Duke. He has all of the power of the Duke, right? Which could be amazing or it could be awful, right? Depending on Angelo. And we're starting to see which one of those it is. Act 1, Scene 2, we see that the city of Vienna is morally bankrupt. I guess that depends on how you define morally bankrupt. But essentially, everyone's sleeping with everybody else. Tons of kids are being born out of wedlock. Prostitution is a pretty huge industry in Vienna. These laws that we find out that the Duke hasn't enforced in the last 14 years, he's kind of hoping that Angelo is going to kind of pick up the slack, right? And he even says in Act 1, Scene 2 that, if he were to enforce these laws after such a long time of not enforcing them, that it would be tyranny, right? He would be a tyrant, and he doesn't want that. So instead, he gets Angelo, and he's like, okay, so Angelo, you're a morally sound dude. You make sure everybody stays in line, right? So the Duke knows what he's doing. He's using Angelo as his fall guy to do the tough thing, which is to enforce these laws, right? So we see that. We also see that Claudio has impregnated Juliet, right, who's his fiance. Now, Claudio tells Lucio that they haven't been married yet because of the fact that there was an issue with her dowry, right? They're waiting until her dowry can get kind of, scraped together so they can get married. Now, if you're unfamiliar with what a dowry is it's also called a bride price during this time period, but it's essentially where the family, the woman's family, the bride's family gathers together money and gathers together, valuable heirlooms, things like that, and then gifts it to the new husband. Okay. To be fair, at the same time, it's not unequal because often what will happen is, the man who wants to marry this woman will come and offer things like sheep and, try to woo the family in that way, right? So there is this sort of exchange of goods that comes with marriage. It's not just about love, it's about economics and finances. Okay, so, it might seem weird here and then later on when we find out more about Angelo and Mariana, but at the same time, this is a structure that's really defined already. Okay, and they're just sort of playing into it. We also see in Act 1, Scene 2 that Claudio sends Lucio to get Isabella, right, from the convent, right? She's about to become a nun. So he says, listen, we don't have much time. And in reality, by the time Lucio gets there in Act 1, Scene 4, she's meant to be sworn in later that day, right? So he wasn't kidding. So he sends Lucio to get Isabella, and he says, we really need her. Okay, she can convince Angelo. And there's some suggestion that he might be, or that Isabella might be able to convince Angelo with her body. based on some of the language that Claudio uses. So it kind of makes you wonder if Claudio's as good a dude as everybody seems to think he is. But then, we kind of move on to Act 1, Scene 3, and this is where things get interesting, right? The Duke meets with Friar Thomas, and Friar Thomas kind of tells him how to be a priest. It's a little weird, right? How to be a friar, so that he can impersonate one. Is that ethical? I'm thinking no. Is that breaking tons of religious laws? I'm thinking yes. Does that break a moral code that's separate from ethics and religion? Yeah, it totally does, right? Especially later on when we see in can't remember if it's Act 2 or 3, where he actually goes to take Claudio's confession, right? So we see that he's acting in all the ways as a friar, and he's planning to do this so that he can keep an eye on Angelo, see what Angelo does, and then also see how the people react to Angelo and his new enforcement of these laws. Okay, and then we get Act 1, Scene 4, where Lucio convinces Isabella to try to convince Angelo to spare Claudio's life. So Lucio gets Isabella to leave the convent where she was sworn to be a nun. We can see how strict a character she is, like, right away. Right at the beginning of Act 1, Scene 4, she's talking to the other nun and says something about the strictness of the rules. And the other nun is like, oh, do you wish they were less strict? And she was like, no, no, no. Back that up. I wish they were more strict. Why do we have so much freedom? Right? So Isabella is unique in the sense that she has a very strict definition of morals, right? And of what can be asked of an individual, which is why later when Angelo asks her what he does, right, she's just floored. She's like, how could anyone do this? How could anyone choose to, kind of put this out there like that? That's not okay, right? So that's basically Act 1. Now, the nice thing about Act 1 is it really sets up a lot of things for us, right? It sets up the setting. We know a heck of a lot about Vienna now, right? We know how it used to be under the Duke. We will know how it will be under Angelo. We know that the church is a little bit complicated, right? Because Friar Thomas is condoning the Duke, acting as a friar, which is weird, right? But then when you think of the fact that religious figures also defer to secular rulers, right? Then I guess maybe it's less weird. I don't know. I still find it weird. We also learn a lot about who the Duke is. We learn a lot about who Angelo thinks he is. We learn about Aeschylus and about how his temperament and how he's able to, stay calm in the face of like drama and theatrics, right? We also know about Isabella, and we know a little bit about Claudio. Also, we kind of see Lucio a little bit, and we realize that he's kind of an idiot, right? So those are the big things that we should have pulled from Act 1. All right, so let's talk about Act 2 here. So from this recap slide, I kind of want to have a conversation about it. So as we go, pipe in with anything that you're thinking, because I didn't want to add specific questions to this PowerPoint and make it so that we were stuck following a rigid structure. When it comes to measure for measure, I like just free-flowing conversation and kind of talking about what we're reading as we go, right? So in Act 2, Scene 1, we see Angelo and Aeschylus talking about adjustments to governance, right? How they're going to run this city now. And then we also see Angelo listening to the hearing for Elbow's wife. We also see him getting bored and storming out. But what does this tell you? And let me kind of pull this down. What does this scene tell you about the characters, right? Because really, who do we see? We see Angelo and Aeschylus, and then we see the whole mass of characters, right? We see Elbow, and we see what's his name? Froth. We see Pompey in here again. So we see a little bit of everybody. But I'm going to be perfectly honest with you, right? Elbow, Froth, and Pompey in this case, you know, they're there to fulfill a function, okay? And what is that function, do you think? Why is this scene, and why are they bickering, and why is this here? What does this tell us about Vienna? James, yeah.
It just shows that how corrupt Vienna is and how pretty much women take advantage of. I mean, how men take advantage of women. If you look
Hmm.
at where when Pompey and what he did is when he included Froth, and even though Froth was a bit skeptical and scared, of answering the questions, but it showed how they. I mean, I think did they rape Elbow's wife, or they take advantage of her sexually. I know that for sure. They both did, you know.
Right.
But again, you know, it was though it was like it's as though they didn't take it as important, because I'm just trying to understand, was she also a prostitute?
She might have been, right? Which is how the fact that she, like you brought up the fact that she may have been raped, that's a possibility, right? But if she works in a brothel, then how could anyone prove that, right? So it kind of tosses a whole nother element in there.
Right. Okay. I mean, so that's what I was getting from there, and I guess because of what Angelo's focus was on, pretty much, I guess, proving a point where now he's a new what I guess governing officer in the government, in charge, that he wanted to
Hmm.
just prove a point, just to like just set his name across and say, how he's I guess how he's a tyrant. So that's why he wasn't really. It really didn't entertain him. He wasn't entertained by by what was going on. But again, it's just that he didn't care about her. I mean, none of them cared about her, but Elbow. And I mean, pretty much that's how they portray women. There's just somebody just to just do whatever they please, and I just think they think they can just get away with it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So, and if you notice throughout the play, right, it's not just women, it's not just Elbow's wife. It's also, Isabella is treated like this as well. You can see it when Lucio first comes to the convent and he hits on her. Like, you're just like, wait, she's assumably, this person who opens up the door to the convent is a nun. Why are you hitting on a nun? Right? There's just no boundaries. So, for any woman that's in this play, right, there's always that threat of, men pushing their sexual desires onto these women. Now, Bree says it's just showcasing the problems Vienna has, and that Angelo really does care since he left with the case of the law he wanted to enforce. Right? Right, exactly. And I like that you agree with what James said. It's about proving Angelo's name, right? He's trying to say this is what I stand for. This big thing over here, this other thing, this is small potatoes. This doesn't bother me. I don't care. Aeschylus, you deal with it, right? So, okay, Bensari says people were wired the wrong way to see women as their toy, not as a human. That's fair, right? At that time, that's very often what it was. James, what are you thinking?
And I guess the part about Elbow, I guess because of his I don't know, lack of speech,
Mm-hmm.
they didn't take him serious. He was a joke to them. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
he was someone like somebody who's uneducated, and yes, he was a constable, and he works for the Duke, but I guess he was still a nobody. And I guess because he was married to wasn't he Mary? That's her name.
Um, I don't.
What was her?
Yeah, you know what? I think you might be right.
Yeah, because he was married to her, and I guess because of I don't know, like again, like I said, I don't know her history. If she was a prostitute before Elbow married her, but I guess again, like I said, because of his state there, he wasn't respected. They didn't respect him.
Right. That's exactly right. And then we also see, Pompey playing some jokes along like with the things that Elbow was saying. Let me find that really fast. He was saying, Elbow had made a mistake and said something about respecting his wife. But Pompey kind of took that as a pun and was like, yeah, you've been respecting your wife since before you were married. And Elbo's like, wait, what? Excuse me? Right? So, we have like, there's just a lot of like weird wordplay in here and just this sort of jumbled kind of notion of the sexual dynamics that are happening in Vienna. And I see Bree says, I wonder if Shakespeare made Elbo's character near illiterate to brush aside the way that women were treated. I think that that's absolutely a fair assertion, right? If this one guy who's trying to stand up for his wife and her, her morals and her, you know, gosh, I can't think of the word, but this one man is trying to stand up for a woman without getting something in return, and he's not able to, right? Because of the way that he speaks. So I think that that's a very fair point. Very fair point. So, all right. So this scene, while we can get lost in the minutia of it, is much better suited to kind of thinking about it in a global sense, like we've done. Because otherwise, then we get sort of wrapped up in, oh my goodness, who said what? What about prunes? Oh my goodness, I don't know. There's something about a 3 pence dish. That doesn't matter, right? That's just to kind of point out the absurdity of this whole situation, right? So remember that use this kind of scene as a representation of a whole rather than as something more specific. Okay. So let's pop back here to our recap PowerPoint, right? A good chunk of Act 2, Scene 1 is taken up by this hearing for Aeschylus's wife, right? So we're just going to kind of pop through the rest of that. We get to Act 2, Scene 2, where Angelo meets Isabella. How does that go? Right? So, how does it go when Angelo and Isabella meet the first time? James, yeah.
I mean, in the beginning, he's dismissing her
Mm-hmm.
completely. Very stern, and he's not gonna. I mean, he wasn't gonna be drawn weak to anything that she said. And I guess, I mean, his decision was made about, you know, um, I guess getting Claudio beheaded. So anything that Isabel said at that moment was irrelevant and just didn't matter at all. He just dismissed her.
Yeah. Yeah, he absolutely did. He was just like, Claudio's going to die. And she's like, no, but wait. And he's like, no, no, no. Claudio's going to die. Right? He's very steadfast. He kept his rule. There was nothing that she could say that would change his mind. Right? Um, and that kind of tells you, Angelo's interest in listening to others, right? We can see that as a ruler, yeah, he confides in Aeschylus, but he doesn't listen to Aeschylus either, right? He tells Aeschylus, all right, Aeschylus, we're going to start enforcing all these laws to their strictest. And Aeschylus is like, I don't think that's a good idea, bro. And Angelo just kind of goes, well, that's what we're going to do, right? So even the most trusted advisors, right? Aeschylus was second in charge. He put Angelo in charge over Aeschylus to test him out, right? But Aeschylus was that logical choice to rule Vienna in the Duke's absence. And the Duke said, no, 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 we're going to try Angelo here. And so he's not listening to Aeschylus. He's not listening to Isabella, who in Act 2 is the absolute voice of reason, right? I mean, she comports herself very well. She explains the situation. She, tries to reason with him in ways he can understand. She even talks about how, you know, morally she doesn't agree with what Claudio did, right? But they were engaged, right? There was a marriage contract. They just hadn't fully finished that whole process, right? So, even the fact that this almost nun who wants the most strict order of nuns, right? Because the thing that the play doesn't really let us know is that the Order of Saint Clare, which is what she was going to be inducted into, is actually the most strict order. It has the most rules, the most limitations of any other convent at the time. Okay, it's right up there with the Franciscan monks who, devoted themselves to knowledge and, did not engage in any activity that was fun at all, right? That was what they were designed to do. And the Order of St. Clair was the counterpart for this order of monks, right? So, you kind of want to realize that she's from this perspective, that she's saying, like, I need this structure, I need this moral guidance, because this is where I feel most comfortable. And then she's advocating for Claudio, who has, totally gone against what she feels is appropriate, right? So that's kind of interesting. So if she's feeling that what Claudio has done is okay for Claudio, while not okay for her, then why can't Angelo see this, right? So, she's trying to reason with him in ways that he understands. So let's sort of pop back to our PowerPoint again. Let's see. Boom. So Angelo asks Isabella to come back the next day, and he has this little monologue at the end of Act 2, Scene 2, right? He's sitting there and he's talking to himself. Everybody has left, so it's just him. And he says, this is line 198 is when it starts, right? And so he says, from thee, even from thy virtue, what's this? What's this? Is this her fault or mine? Right? Because he's feeling like he's interested in her, right? Which is something that we know isn't something that usually plagues him, right? Usually he's very straightforward. He's very demanding. He expects, himself to abide by the same rules as everyone else. He doesn't engage in this emotional type situation, but he does here, right? So he's confused. Is this her fault or mine? The tempter or the tempted? Who sins most? Ha! Right? So you're like, you sit here and you read this and you realize that there is such conflict happening inside this man, right? And this is conflict that he has never engaged with before. He can't tell, oh, is this something that is my fault? Is this her fault? When in reality, it's nobody's fault. He's just attracted to Isabella. Big deal. He's just got to learn to deal with it. But because he's never had this experience before, he doesn't know how, right? We find out later that he has, been engaged with Mariana before, but that whole thing was purely financial, right? And we can see that the way that the Duke talks about it in Act 3, right? So this whole attraction is very, very new to Angelo. And you see that conflict in 25 lines at the end of Act 2, Scene 2. All right. So we have that. And then the Duke kind of talks to Juliet a little bit about her relationship with Claudio. Um, he asks her about whether the feelings that they hold for each other, right, Claudio and Juliet, are mutual or whether they are one-sided, like if Claudio forced himself on her, right? And Juliet's just there like, no, no, totally mutual. We plan on getting married. It's a thing, right? It's legit. We just haven't done it yet. So, Juliet's standing there advocating for their relationship with someone that she thinks is a friar, right? At this point, he's dressed up. Apparently, no one can figure out who he is. I mean, I don't get it, right? You put on a cloak and you still look like yourself, but in Shakespeare world, it makes a difference, right? So he's going around as the friar trying to kind of dig up dirt on this situation, figure out what's happening. And he does get some information. He finds out that this act that Angelo takes is actually, or this action that Angelo takes is kind of unwarranted because it's not a one-sided affair, right? This is something, this is two people who love each other, who are committed to one another, which is very different from most other people in Vienna, right? And so Angelo, personally, I think, uses this as an opportunity to, show that even when you are the best example of what marriage should be, you still need to follow the rules of Vienna, right? And so everyone else looks at Claudio and thinks, oh, what a good dude. He's really committed to Juliet. They've never kind of cheated on each other or anything like that. You can see that evidence in the text. And, he's like, everybody else would be like, what would happen if I were to get busted for this? Right? Because we know that a ton of men in Vienna use the brothels, which means that there are a ton of women in Vienna who work for the brothels, right? So it just sort of makes a conflict here. Everyone looks at Claudio, who's this, beacon of kind of goodness in this sense, and thinks, wow, if that's what's happening to him, I don't even want to think about what would happen to me, right? So we kind of get that kind of vibe. Um, and then Act Two, Scene Four. Oh my goodness, does it go down? So Angelo propositions Isabella, says that that she should sleep with him so that he would free Claudio. Excuse me, what? What do you guys think about that? Is that some messed up stuff? Does that make sense? What do you think? James, yeah.
I mean, in all honesty, he's human. He got weak. I mean, what she did is that because she challenged his authority and his intellect, he got aroused from that, and that's why he was,
Mm-hmm.
it's immediate to her that he was just drawn. He got attracted to her, and now he wanted her. Um, did he want her as a wife or just for that moment? I don't know. But because I guess because she was outspoken. I mean, and she didn't accept the fact of the decision of Claudia being executed. That's why I guess he felt drawn to her, not just only intellectually, but it just became, I guess it was like everything just was just drawn to her. And I mean, in the beginning, if you look where in I think it's act one, I think scene three, where
Mm-hmm.
Claudia Lucio to go reach out to Isabel. He he even mentioned that how Isabel's pretty, how she's beautiful, and that
Yeah.
hoping that her beauty would draw would draw attention and also change his mind. So
Mm-hmm.
with all that put together and her speaking, I guess he was hypnotized. He just was attracted to her and couldn't resist her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that that's fair. That's a very fair point. He had no chance, right? This woman waltzes in, starts telling him what to do, and he's just like, whew, what's happening, right? In the chat, I can see some things happening here, right? It fits the narrative of the times, right? This idea, good point, Craig. That point that like men are controlling the dynamics. I think that's what you mean. And so by kind of taking Isabella's power away from her in that way, I mean, he still gives her the opportunity to consent, but is it consent if it's coercion? Not so much, right? So he in a way takes away her ability to consent, and then he just wants to use this as a tool to benefit his own his own plan. All right. Bensari says that his ego played in. I totally think that that's accurate, right? It's all about power and control with Angelo. Whether he was enamored by Isabella or not, we do have some suggestion that he is, by the fact that he's talking to himself about how he's entranced by her. But at the same time, based on what we know about Angelo, can he be actually entranced by anyone? Right, that's a question that we'll never know. Um, Bree says it really brings home the fact that Angelo didn't care about the law or women, just himself. Absolutely, absolutely. And if you go back to Act One, Angelo, or no, right at the beginning of Act Two, I think Angelo tells Aeschylus, dude, if I ever got into that same situation as Claudio, like, I would have to deal with the consequences. And you know what? He's getting himself into this same situation as Claudio. And is he going to deal with the consequences? No, he's really going to try hard not to have to deal with those consequences. Just the good ones, not the bad ones, right? So, we kind of see this hypocrisy playing out, which is kind of running rampant throughout. I mean, Lucio is, in the next act is claiming that the Duke is this womanizer, right? And really, Lucio is the womanizer, and the Duke doesn't have anything to do with women necessarily. He's listening to Lucio talk about himself, right? To talk about the Duke while he's right there having that conversation dressed up as a friar. Like, what? Lucio is the biggest moron of this play, but I love him so much. He's kind of my favorite, just because he always says the dumbest stuff, right? And he is a prime example of what is wrong with Vienna, right? This need to constantly step in and assert control and dominance, and to kind of play on words to demean others, right? He's doing all of these things. So let's pop down to Act 3. We've only got a few minutes left. We got kind of wrapped up in Act 2 because it was so much fun. So we have some things going on in Act 3, right? We see the Duke, who's dressed as Friar Lodovic, and Claudio. We see them meeting and discussing Claudio's death. The Duke is giving him his last rites. Now, think about that, because guess who gives last rites? Not dukes. Priests, right? Friars. But it complicates things because we see from the last week's class, right, about how religion and political powers, right, religion and sorry, I just had an alert from my computer and it was so loud and scared me to death. Whew, my heart rate is still climbing down. Oh, okay, back to what I was saying. Shake it off. Okay, so the secular rulers, right, kings and dukes and things like that, they were affirmed by the divine right of kings, which means that God gives them that ability to rule and that power, right? So as a ruler, he has that power vested in him by God. Now, what happens with priests? Well, priests have their own type of power vested in them by God as well, right? And so in this play, it almost makes it seem like this power is interchangeable. Like the Duke is a priest, and but it doesn't necessarily go the other way where the priest is a Duke unless we're talking about the Duke himself, right? So we kind of see that subtle, suggestion, or not so subtle suggestion, that the secular law is more dominant than religious law, right? So we kind of have that in the background. We also see that Claudio and Isabella are reunited. And what in the world happens in this discussion when Claudio is sitting here listening to Isabella tell her about what Angelo has proposed? What does he do? What does he say? Does he act how Isabella wants him to or expects him to? Ansari says no, 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 he does not. At first, it seems like he does, right? Because he's like, oh my goodness, that's awful. I can't believe he would do that. What a morally bankrupt guy, right? And then he thinks about it. Right, so Bensari says he doesn't act as a brother who would protect his sister. No. At this point, he's looking out for his own skin, right? He's going to die tomorrow, and he is freaking out. So at first, he seems resigned to the fact that he's going to die, right? And kind of flip over to where that is. He says, let's see, where is it? Let's see. course, I can't find exactly what I'm looking for. Oh, I did. I just found it. 1 second. So it's Act 3, Scene 1, lines 108. 108 to 110, right? Dost thou think, Claudio, if I would yield him my virginity, thou mightst be free, right? And so we see, kind of Isabella kind of dancing around, and then she just comes right out and says it. And Claudio's like, oh heavens, it cannot be, right? That was his initial reaction. And then they talk about it a little bit more, and he's like, no, you can't do that, right? And that's line 117. Isabella says, be ready for your death tomorrow in line 121. Um, and then he starts talking about sins, right? And which are less and more deadly. And he's talking about, he comes in on line 133. He starts talking about how awful it must be to die, right? And Isabella's just standing there. Like, you could just see her getting crankier and crankier with this sort of line of reasoning. She knows where it's going. And, Claudio he's just taking the expected path. Once she sees that he's not all in the no, don't sleep with Angelo camp, right? So he starts talking about how, he says, sweet sister, let me live. This is line 149. What sin you do to save a brother's life, nature dispenses with the deed so far that it becomes a virtue. Well, that sounds like the most bogus thing I've ever heard. I don't know about you. You make this sacrifice for me, and its sacrifice is so great that it's not actually a bad thing. It's a good thing. And Isabella she goes, oh, you beast, right? And then just starts raining down on him. And it's beautiful. I would totally give Isabella a high five in this moment, personally. Claudio deserves it so much. But then, we kind of see him when he's talking to the Duke, he sort of walks it back and he realizes that he's done wrong. Okay, so we're not quite through Act 3, but I do want to let you guys know that I posted videos for Act 2, 3, 4, and 5. The Act 5 video was actually a video that I had taken with my class last term. I feel like that kind of interaction might be helpful because they were a little bit more, kind of vocal, and we did a lot more back and forth. And that might make you feel like you have a better kind of grasp on what's being discussed. But the analysis videos of 2, 3, and 4 are already posted in week 7, so you're welcome to check those out if you want to kind of get more in depth with specific quotations and things like that. So, all right, so I want to just say thank you so much for such a great term. I also want to put out a reminder that Gwinnett Tech has asked me to, which is please register for fall classes if you have not yet. So, they just asked me to say that. But it really has been truly amazing working with you guys this term. I have really enjoyed it. Hopefully you've enjoyed it as well. And if you ever need anything at all, please don't hesitate to reach out. All right, I'm always here to help. So just send me an email, come by my office once we're allowed in the building again. Whatever you need, I'm here. All right, so I hope you guys have a great rest of term. Good luck on your draft and your final draft and your peer review, and then you're done. All right, so have a good one, and like I said, if you need anything, just reach out. I'm going to go video off, but I'll still be here until the last person leaves the room. All right, see you guys.
See ya. Thank you.